Hello everyone, welcome to FedScoop TV. My name is Greg Otto and we're here at the 2016 Red Hat Government Symposium today, and I'm talking with Tim Yeaton, Red Hat Senior Vice President for its Infrastructure Business Group. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Greg, for having me.
So, what strides has open source made in the federal government over the last administration? What do you expect in the next administration?
Well, when I think about the administration, it's been almost 8 years, and it's pretty extraordinary what's happened with open source in government. You know, back at the beginning of the term, just to pick a reference point, there was a general reticence to even consider open source. We've now moved to a stage where we've got explicit policies around encouragement of using open source-based solutions, a recognition that security, in fact, is often improved by virtue of the open collaborative development process. And I think we just see that trend continuing, that we went from some trepidation at the beginning of the term, as it were, to strongly embracing open source, its technologies, the vendors that are commercializing that. So I think it's been almost a complete evolution.
Okay, so cybersecurity is top of mind for agencies. How does open source software help agencies meet their cybersecurity goals?
Well, I think there's what people I think have come to understand, that for software built through open source collaborative development models, software is as good as the developer authoring it. That said, though, the open process does improve time to security and time to fixing problems, right? So you look even where there have been identified vulnerabilities when it's in open source components, usually the fix is built and propagated within hours. So the time to secure is notably better, the time to repair when a vulnerability is identified, and you have a whole, you have hundreds of thousands of developers who are paying attention all the time, who take pride of authorship in their code. And at the same time, too, the vendors that are commercializing these technologies, security is top of mind. I've been doing open source since long before it was called that, and in the early days, security was often a concern because people assumed, since you had visibility to the source, should you want, that it was easier to insert backdoors and other vulnerabilities. And on the surface that's true, but also finding them, identifying them, getting them out, far easier.
Right.
And those communities take pride in what they do. So I think what we see is that open source, both the code itself, how it's built, who's working on it, and what's done in the open actually ensures better security across the spectrum.
So also top of mind for agencies and across government overall is this IT modernization push. As agencies look to modernize their systems in the near future, how does open source benefit that?
Well, it's an interesting point here that everything we just said about open source, from a development perspective, it makes it far easier to embrace more agile development methodologies. So the first task typically in IT modernization is to improve how you develop software, adopt agile development methods. Well, it turns out if you're going to do that, what you're really doing is rapid prototyping cycles. And in order to prove out a concept in a 6-week sprint, let's say, it's best to have a ready cache of pre-built components. Well, that's the world's open source at sites like GitHub and community sites. So the first thing is in their move to agile, just using open source development processes and technologies, open source components, as part of that will make you far more nimble. And so that's an immediate consideration. How do I orient my development activities to be more nimble? Open source techniques play a role in that, and open source components. I think even more importantly at some level is, if you look at the technologies that organizations are going to bet on for providing the basis for, you call it digital transformation, IT modernization, it's things like cloud computing, big data and analytics, mobility. All those technologies today are innovated first in open source and open source communities. So the very fundamental fabric that they'll be betting on is in fact built out of open source. In fact, the world's development model has largely leaned towards open source as an accelerated way to drive innovation. So they're going to be betting on open source technologies, whether they fully understand that or not. So open source plays a role at how people evolve their development to be more agile, and how they evolve their infrastructure to support that agility, drive down cost, get far more flexibility, because all the technologies that they're going to use are open source.
Great. Very interesting insight, Tim. Thanks for joining us.
Sure, thank you.